Thank you. It's a tremendous pleasure for me to be with you here today. The story I want to share with you this afternoon begins with a journey. It's a voyage that happens every year here in the Indian Ocean. This journey has shaped my own career and my understanding of what marine conservation means in the 21st century, because it confronts us with some of the enormous challenges as well as some of the incredible opportunities that exist in conservation today. This is Zoe. He's heading on a voyage. He's a fisherman on the Indian Ocean island of Madagascar, where I first started working as a marine biologist 15 years ago. His journey will take him almost 1,000 kilometers, sailing with his brothers, his cousins, north in a dugout canoe. They travel with no engine, no lights, no navigation, no safety equipment, often sailing dozens of miles out into the Indian Ocean. At night, they'll navigate by the stars. They'll take what rest they can on sandbanks whenever the wind drops. This is a remote and starkly beautiful corner of Africa, a bewildering network of reefs and islands and lagoons, some of Africa's biggest coral reefs and mangrove forests, as well as waters that are home to some of the highest densities and diversities of marine life found anywhere on the planet. Indeed, the highest diversities of life found anywhere outside the Southeast Asian coral triangle are found here, from corals to cetaceans, sharks, turtles. Even the mythical coelacanth lives in these remote waters. Zoe will be gone for at least 9 months. If the fishing's no good, he'll stay away for a year, maybe longer, leaving behind his family, his wife, and his 5 children here in his home village of Bevwitz, where the fish stocks are now so depleted that it's no longer possible for him to feed his family if he stays at home. His destination is the aptly named Barren Islands archipelago here in the Mozambique Channel, where Zoe and hundreds, sometimes thousands like him, will make their home for the next year. They're targeting the fish stocks that in such a remote place are still abundant in these almost pristine waters. Migrants like Zoe will make their homes in makeshift camps, underneath tarpaulins or sheltered from the sun and the weather by the canvas of their boat sails. They live at the mercy of the wind, the weather, enormous tides. Spring tides will regularly inundate the islands that they call home. When Zoe's caught enough fish, he'll make the long journey to the mainland, paddling in his canoe. This may be 40 or 50 kilometers in the tropics, paddling to sell what he can. If there's a surplus, he'll send it back to his family in Bevwitz using a mobile money payment system. Zoe's family are Vezu. This is a traditional nomadic seafaring people from southwestern Madagascar. The Vezu depend intimately on the ocean. In fact, they believe that the origin of their people came from a mermaid, Ampela Mananisa, who came out of the ocean when she fell for a fisherman. She taught him everything there is to know about the sea, and even today, Vezu practices believe that they've been passed down from Ampela Mananisa. When a child is born, the umbilical cord is left at the low water mark to be taken back by the ocean. All family members fish in this remote and exceptionally arid environment. There is absolutely no alternative for food, for income, for cultural identity. Seafood on this coast accounts for the sole source of dietary protein in 99% of household meals. And Zoe's country is one of the poorest on earth. It's also getting poorer, with well over 90% of the population living on well under $2 a day. That's a population much bigger than the country of Australia, over 2/3 of whom face chronic food insecurity. As one Vezu elder once said to me, we are prisoners of our hunger. In open access fisheries like these, there's absolutely no limit on where, when, or how much people can fish. The result is ever more people chasing ever fewer fish, a ratcheting up of fishing pressure, an arms race deploying ever more effective and yet ruthless and destructive fishing gears that leave nothing in their wake. Good in the short term, but of course making an abrupt departure from Vesu traditions of living lightly and using low-impact gears. Fisheries driven by lucrative new markets, many of them in Asia. We've just heard about shark fins. Sea cucumber fisheries. Sea cucumbers are apparently a lucrative aphrodisiac in some Asian countries. I confess I've tried them and they actually don't work. Sea turtles, turtle plastrons, manta ray gills, even now fish swim bladders. Vesu, like Zo, have absolutely no legal rights to their customary ancestral fishing grounds. No means to manage them or regulate them themselves, to protect them or steward them from these overfishing impacts, or to steward them and regulate them from outside threats. Threats like industrial fishing vessels, many of which come from foreign countries, including my own, I'm ashamed to say, in the European Union, which pays a negligible fraction of the landed value it catches in these waters every year to this country. And from even further afield, the impacts of global climate change, a sinister force that the Vesu themselves, with their low-impact lifestyles, haven't contributed to at all, yet are living on the front line, destabilizing weather patterns that they depend on to migrate and to fish, increasing the frequency and severity of storms and tropical cyclones, and now perhaps most terrifying of all, the annual bleaching of corals, leading to massive mortality of the very underlying ecosystem caused by thermal stress. These photos taken just a couple of months ago in the Mozambique Channel. This is Melantine. She's from Zo's neighboring village of Andavadok. She's not able to make the long journey north with the migrants. Like most women, she fishes on foot, targeting invertebrates like octopus on the reef flat. That's the exposed bit at low water, walking amongst the coral heads. When Melantine was a girl, she remembers that on this particular stretch of reef flat, it would take her several hours to walk across the reef because the coral was so thick that she had to negotiate her way between the coral heads. Back then, she didn't have to hunt octopus in their dens because she could catch the free-swimming ones, and they were so plentiful that she could take 20 or 30 large octopus in a single outing. And back then, she had to make sure she was out of the water before the incoming tide reached her waist, because of the risk of attracting the unwanted attention of overly curious sharks that would surge into the lagoon on the incoming tide. Today, there are no sharks, and it takes her just a few minutes to walk across that same section of reef. Even with her sharp eyes scouring the lagoon for hours on end, she's lucky if she catches 2 or 3 juvenile octopus. In her lifetime, she's witnessed the collapse of this once magnificent coral reef ecosystem. The Vesu are not alone. The trade-offs that these people face, the vicious cycles of poverty, driving a reliance on the sea, driving levels of fishing that themselves exacerbate that underlying poverty, are lived and breathed every day on the boats, the beaches, and the landing stations throughout the tropics, from the coasts of Africa across much of the Indian Ocean and in many areas of the Caribbean and the Pacific. Vesu, like Zo and Melantine and hundreds of millions of people like them, are confronted every day with the very human reality of our planet's marine biodiversity crisis. Now, you'll be pleased to hear that there is another direction that this narrative can take, and it relies on a breathtakingly simple device for rebuilding fisheries. I'm talking about marine reserves. Think of a marine reserve as a natural investment bank within which we protect our stock, our investment from fishing. Fish grow and spawn inside, accumulating with interest. Eventually, there's so much life inside the reserve that pioneers start to venture beyond its boundaries, spilling into our fishing nets outside. And ultimately, that interest, that's the fish spilling over, can exceed our initial savings deposit. That's what was in there to start with. That's all because of one of the greatest wonders of the natural world. As fish grow, their fertility explodes in a very non-linear way. So modest growth leads to a colossal leap in fertility. The longer we leave fish in a reserve, the bigger they grow, and the bigger they grow, the more their fertility soars, giving us that surge in fish and larvae that swim out of our reserve to replenish our fishing grounds year after year indefinitely. Now, these returns are so effective that if we can scale up protection to around a third of our oceans, we're in with a chance of rebuilding fish stocks worldwide. But two problems stand in our way of reaching that 30% target. Firstly, our seas are now so depleted and degraded, like these coral reefs in Kenya, that interest rates start low. And where fishing means survival, the opportunity cost of waiting for that dividend may not be a viable option. Of course, Zoe and Melantine understand the rationale of conservation better than I do, but they can't afford to forego fishing for so much of their reef for so long, 3 years maybe, waiting for those stocks to recover. They won't be able to feed their family. Hence, our movement so often fails to capture that essential local buy-in, and all too often alienates and disenfranchises the very people who should count on its success. Hence, again, the vast majority of the world's marine reserves, sadly, persist largely as notional paper parks with no meaningful protection, resented rather than defended by the people that live around them. Now, our second big problem relates to scale. Today, we're fully protecting less than 3% of our oceans within marine reserves. Even with an unprecedented global mobilization of philanthropy, donor support, and policy reform, we're decades off course if we want to achieve that tenfold expansion of protection minimum that science tells us we need to safeguard our seas. And our window for action is closing fast, given the accelerating impacts of climate change and the soaring human demands on our seas for protein. Clearly, to have any hope of enduring in the long run, or being scaled to the size that we so urgently need as a planet, marine protection and marine reserves cannot be imposed from the outside. They must be driven by and for those communities whose lives and futures are entwined with the fate of the biodiversity that we are trying to protect. If we continue to see people as the problem in marine conservation, then ours will forever remain a sector that's dealing with conflict. But if we allow ourselves to reimagine that relationship and see people not as the problem, but as the solution, then we can transform this challenge into an opportunity. Because nobody has a greater interest in making marine conservation work than the people that depend on our ocean. Nobody stands to gain more. So if we can get this right, if we can square this circle, we have a chance of mobilizing an army of conservationists worldwide whose deep ecological knowledge, whose motivation, whose need for conservation far eclipses that of my own marginal sector of marine biologists and conservationists. Back in Melantine's village of Andavadoc, her community has shown me over the last 15 years how this alternative reality is possible by taking decisive steps to tackle this paradox head on. Now, it just so happens that some species can recover phenomenally quickly with protection, like this tropical octopus. Today is, incidentally, World Octopus Day, which grow at exponential rates. Octopus gleaned on coral reefs here in Madagascar are exported all the way to Europe, one species underpinning an entire coastal economy, in a place where fishing is the only job on offer, where fishing is survival. A decade ago, catches here were starting to fall. The outlook wasn't good. Melantine's village decided to set aside an area of the reef where they usually catch octopus for just a few months to see what would happen. Now, I want you to imagine that you are a Malagasy octopus fisherwoman, used to landing octopus under 1 kilo. On a good day, your whole family might catch you 6 kilos in total, fetching you $3 to feed 7 people. Now imagine how it feels when you pull a bigger octopus out the water, not 2 or even 3 times the usual size. Imagine an octopus 10 times the size, at 8 kilos. People saw and people talked. Soon, neighbours were replicating this model, and in a decade, it's gone viral, being repeated hundreds of times around one of the longest coastlines in Africa. It spawned new fishing legislation, it's crossed international borders, it's now being adapted to other species and other fisheries around the Indian Ocean. But most excitingly of all, our research shows that this model yields real monetary profits, with a monthly internal rate of return of 92%. That's exceeding any financial product on the market. These guys are almost doubling their money every month, reliably. So these guys are earning more by fishing less. But this isn't conservation at all. This is fisheries management. But in the process, these communities have seen what is possible, that they themselves can manage and rebuild their fisheries, and now, having seen this, something quite remarkable is happening. These same villages, starting with Melantines, have started raising the bar, creating permanent marine reserves within vast, locally managed conservation areas, vast areas of coral reef and mangrove forest closed for fishing to all species, not just octopus, and closed permanently, not just temporarily, building for the first time those critical community investment banks that these people so urgently need. And now, 10 years on, we're starting to see the long-term conservation benefits of this approach. Fish biomass within these reserves, the ultimate measure of conservation success, is starting to build relative to areas outside. This is exciting science that's pushing the frontiers of our understanding of the role that people can play in driving conservation in the ocean from the grassroots. And these people are going further still, securing the legal rights from government to manage and steward their oceans, and so eliminate outside destructive impacts, including industrial fishing vessels, meaning that these Vesu children face a more secure future. Now, all of this was unimaginable when I embarked on this journey. In the last 10 years alone, 114 locally managed marine reserves have been established around the coast of Madagascar, covering 13% of that island's seabed and spawning a national movement in marine protection, inspiring even the president of the country to pledge to further triple the total area of marine protection. This is nothing short of a local marine conservation revolution, the like of which we've never seen before anywhere in the Indian Ocean. Village by village, we're learning that conservation doesn't need to be about taking less, because it can be one of the highest yielding investment opportunities on the planet. Here in Madagascar, it's already impacting over 250,000 people, and this is just the beginning. 1.5 billion of us live around our tropical coasts, including some of the poorest and most vulnerable people on Earth, dependent on our planet's richest yet most threatened marine biodiversity. Our species' overwhelming dependence on the oceans is, of course, the greatest threat to life in our seas, but it's also the best opportunity we've got to demonstrate the tremendous amount we have as a species to gain from conservation. I've had the enormous privilege of playing a small part in this revolution over the last 15 years. And now our work has arrived at a new level where we're ready to share these experiences with communities from further afield, people who might be separated by oceans or cultures or languages, and yet who live from one day to the next facing very similar challenges to Madagascar's Vesu. My organization, Blue Ventures, builds learning networks of people, community organizations, NGOs, even governments, to share this profound learning in marine conservation, helping to seed and catalyze the further expansion of this movement up and down coastlines in the Indian Ocean, in East Africa, and further afield. And it's starting to grow. Today, we're supporting more than 20 partner organizations across 9 countries in the Indian Ocean on a shoestring budget. We do this by learning exchanges, barefoot exchanges, sharing our stories, our experiences, and our learning with communities, and equipping them with the tools, the knowledge, and the technical support that they need to rebuild their fisheries. Today, these community-managed marine protected areas cover an area exceeding 2.5 million of your American football pitches around the Indian Ocean. That's an area apparently bigger than Connecticut that's been inspired not by conversations happening on conference stages or in the pages of scientific literature, but by conversations happening around our coasts. That is where the magic happens. Take Francois. He's been fishing sharks for 40 years. This year, he won't be going on the migration with friends like Zoe heading north to the Barren Islands. He'll be staying in his home village of Lamboara, just south of Melantine's village, where he'll be helping to police and enforce his community's first marine reserve. And next week, he will leave Madagascar for the first time in his life to travel to Kenya to meet with Kenyan fishermen and women to share his experiences in community-led conservation. Of course, Francois still has to fish every day for the rest of his life, but he wants to rebuild fisheries to what they were when he was 18, and he was sharing these waters with sharks that were bigger than his boat. Francois, Melantine, Zoe's journeys, their sacrifices, their struggles, they illustrate the inextricable links between people and nature that really set the stage for our work as marine conservationists today. Ignoring these links and connections only risks perpetuating broken models of conservation, but exploring them and understanding them, just as the Vezu are doing, can accelerate our work and our impact to a level that's beyond our wildest imagination. Because if we can succeed in finding these win-wins and scaling them up, in which conservation and livelihoods go hand in hand, putting the needs of people to the fore, then we have a hope of demonstrating that taking less from our oceans really does give us much more. Conservation can become a narrative of abundance instead of austerity, and we have a hope of mobilizing the hundreds of millions of people who work in and around fishing to work with us and not against us. Thank you.